Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so you rejoin us once again. We've just started, and your colleagues are now drawing a simple, very straightforward, standard demand and supply diagram, where we have demand sloping downwards from left to right. Just move that around so you can see it properly. Demand sloping downwards from left to right, supply sloping upwards from left to right, and we have our point in the intersection here. Thomas, do you remember what that's called? The point at which the two are equal, where they intersect? It's a term you might come across in science. Barney? Equilibrium, very good. I'm sure the millions of people watching this in the global economy will be very impressed by that. So that is the equilibrium position, and that establishes a price of P and a quantity demanded and supplied of Q1. So we've got P1 and Q1. So we'll just give everyone a minute to make a note of that. If you're noting this at home, obviously you would need to be noting this in your exercise book. I'll just bring you closer, ladies and gentlemen, bring you closer to the action, as they say. Okay, anyone not completed the diagram?
Wait, so do I label?
You could label it if you wanted to put just point A, as we have done in previous diagrams, Thomas. Okay, so we are thinking about, ladies and gentlemen, what goods and or services an economy produces. And if we think at the moment of the pandemic, there's been a lot of certain goods and services produced as a consequence of the pandemic. And what might one of those goods and services be, Sophia? Speak up, please, so that the millions of people following us on the interweb can hear. Masks. Okay, face masks. So if I were to say to you, let's put that in economics language. Let's get into the economic nomenclature, if we will. Louis, what would you say has happened to the demand for face masks since March of 2020? It has? Okay, so Louis, ladies and gentlemen, Louis is saying that it has risen. There's been an increase in demand. And put your hand up, please, if you would disagree with that. No, of course, we would all agree there's been very much an increase in the demand for these face masks. Now, as a consequence of that, how would I go about showing that on this particular diagram? Omar. Speak up, please, so that everyone can hear. Okay, so what you said was, repeat that, you said that D, what would happen to D?
Draw a line from
the equilibrium? No?
Like the price, for example.
Yes.
And then wherever it meets in the line, you draw a line down.
Okay, but what we want to know is, if more people are buying these face masks, what might happen to this D curve if more people want the masks? Sadja? Very good. It would. So what, ladies and gentlemen, what your colleague Sadja has just said is that it would go up. Now, by go up, what do you mean? That this curve, Sadie, do you mean I think what you really mean is it would sort of shift this way. Is that what you mean? Is that what you mean, or am I putting words in your mouth? Okay, absolutely, bang on, yes. And what your learned colleague Sadie has just said, that is, if more people want it, the price will go up. If more people demand it, the price will go up. So you're absolutely right. Yes.
Wouldn't a curve, wouldn't it
So I think you make a fair point, but what we've always said, GCSE and A level, we always keep these as straight lines because it keeps our analysis more simple and straightforward. But you're absolutely right. It's called the demand curve. Those of you who are lucky to carry on at university with your economic studies, you'll see this as a curve. But to come back to the point, the demand curve will shift to the right. Okay? Now, I'm going to now draw that onto, apologies, ladies and gentlemen, for the tardiness of this diagram, but it's the best I can do in the circumstances. So this is my diagram, a little bit tardy, but it's just because we're using my finger to draw this. So the demand curve, I'm going to shift that to the right. Ladies and gentlemen, you need to do the same. And it needs to be parallel to D1. So we're shifting it parallel. Bless you. And what will that be called? That will be called, Mary, not D1. This one will be called D2. Exactly. So we need to label that D2. And we need to point out one or two special new things about this position of D2. Put your hand down for the moment, please. Let our colleagues catch up. So parallel line to the right. Okay, Caitlin, do we have a new, if you will, X factor, a new intersection? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. We sure do. We sure do. And where is it, Caitlin?
Where the demand one meets the supply one.
No, not where this is D1 meets supply 1. So where's the new equilibrium?
Where D2 meets supply one.
Very good. It is where D2 meets our original supply curve. That is our, can we sit up please? That is our new equilibrium position. Okay. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, for having to tell people to sit up in the lesson. Okay, so we have to point this out. So again, we're going to sort of circle that. Yes, Saja?
I'm just a little bit confused. Do you know the line going down here? So the price goes up and then the demand goes down.
This is P1 is the equilibrium price.
That's supply.
P1 is the equilibrium price.
Yeah.
And it's meeting both supply and demand. It's where the demand curve intersects the supply curve, right? So that point Q1, that is quantity supplied and demanded because they are the same at that point.
So that's the price you tell.
P1. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Now we have our new equilibrium. What happens to the price, Mary?
It goes up.
Correct. And we can see that. So we need to take our dashed line across from that new equilibrium. So that's P2. Yes.
So you label that one P2.
Correct. Yep. Yes.
Wouldn't when you go down it'd be Q2.
You preempting my questions? No, Omar. Yes. So we would take this down, and that'll be Q2. So Ben, could you explain what's happened on this curve, on this diagram, please?
The supplies increased.
Well, let's start. What's our initial equilibrium? What's our starting point? where S1 meets D1, and what price and quantity does that give us? Well, price and quantity aren't the same, are they? Right, so there's our equilibrium. What's the equilibrium price initially? It's on the board. P1. And our equilibrium quantity? Q1. Okay. Then what happens? The demand for face masks goes up, and that causes... No, that causes... Before we get to that, that causes... Before we get to that, that causes... Which curve has moved? Right. Okay. So let's just rewind. Initial equilibrium P1 Q1. Demand for face masks goes up. Hence the demand curve. Okay, well the term we would use is shifts. So the demand curve shifts to the what direction, left or right? Correct. Okay, carry on.
So we've got a new quantity in price.
Correct. Keep going.
So the demand is more.
Correct. Keep going.
And
So tell me what's happened to price.
it's increased.
From P1 to P2. Okay, and is that an increase or a decrease?
Increase.
Okay. And talk to me about quantity demanded.
It's increased from Q1 to Q2.
It's increased from Q1 to Q2. And talk to me about quantity supplied.
It's increased
From?
D1 to D.
No, supplied. You're talking about demand now. Tell me what's happened to supply.
It's increased.
From?
What's just gone further along the line?
Very good. Great point. So we've gone up the supply curve. So does that mean you're supplying more or less?
More.
Correct. So what's happened to supply?
It's increased.
Correct. Okay. Now your learned colleague, Ben there, he's just summarised that beautifully for you all. So let me just, let's just recap that once again. Initial equilibrium, P1, Q1. The demand for face masks, ladies and gentlemen, look. The demand for face masks increases. And what's the special term for the movement, Louis, of the demand curve? Very good. It shifts to the, Barney, which direction? Forming a new what? Equilibrium, bang on. And then we have a new Thomas. Price has gone from,
P1 to P2,
and quantity supplied has gone from,
Q1 to Q2,
and quantity demanded has gone from.
D1 to D2,
Okay, but on the bottom axis it's gone from
Q1 to Q2.
Q1 to Q2. Bingo, right.
I'm like a little bit confused. There's price and then there's the quantity demanded. So what's the supply?
So
A little bit lost.
I understand your confusion. That's an often confusing aspect.
Because when you say like K1 and then Q1, I don't understand why there's like a supply then.
Okay, so your learned colleague Sadia is a very interesting question. So what she's saying is, how are we actually identifying and distinguishing the demand from the supply? So it's a very interesting point. And it really does, ladies and gentlemen, it focuses on the label which is on the x-axis. So Sadia, what is that label on the x-axis? And quantity demanded and supplied. is the label on the x-axis. I didn't draw it on that previous diagram, but this is, quantity demanded, okay, D, I'm just putting that for an abbreviation, and, Barney, can we say it, please? Quantity demanded and supplied. Now, Sajja, if we have a demand curve like so, and we take a point, let's just say here. Now that might mean, Sajja, in terms of the quantity, for example, of face masks, that might mean that you've got, I'm trying to write with my finger, that might mean that you've got 10 face masks demanded. Yes? Okay. So, Sajja, what if I had another diagram with the supply curve on it, and a point coming down, like so. That might mean that we have 10 face masks supplied. Yeah? Because we're measuring quantity demanded and supplied along the x-axis. Hang on, I'm coming to that point. But do you understand that?
So it's quantity demanded and supplied on the same.
Correct. So all we're doing is we're bringing these two things together, and we're actually drawing the supply curve on the same diagram. So therefore, whenever we read down, we can say, all right, so this 10 means that there's 10 demanded, but there's also 10 supplied. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And was that your question?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Now to come back, let's go back then to that diagram which we have just drawn. This one. So we've established, Thomas, that the demand has done what to the price level?
And it's made it increase.
Okay. Now, would you or would you not want to be selling these if the price was going up, Malaika? Yes, so your customers are willing and also able to pay more. Would you like to get into making these if that was the case? Of course. Now, at the start of the lesson, when I introduced this on FaceTube, I said that we were going to talk about the what, as in what goods and services are demanded. Or another way of looking at it, what goods and services are produced in an economy. Now, would you be willing and able, would you want to supply things, would you want to make things if there was lots of demand for it, Ben?
Yes.
Of course you would. And Mary, how would that help you as the person who was selling these things if there was lots of demand? You would make more money. And how do we know that you would make more money, Sophia? Because our demand and supply diagram shows that the price goes up. Excellent. Okay, now what I want you to do, before we move on to the next little segment, we've got one question, ladies and gentlemen. Go ahead.
Do you know if the price is going up because the demand is going up? Do you know the suppliers that supply the material for the firms to make it? Wouldn't they make their prices go up as well?
Potentially, but not every day, or not every second of the day. Maybe in the long term. And of course, if you were a clever firm and a clever businessman or woman, you would make sure that you negotiate some sort of deal long term, that you wouldn't get caught in that sort of trap. But yeah, I mean, that's obviously a potential that could happen. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, your colleagues now, what they're going to do in their exercise books is they're going to write me an explanation of this diagram, explaining what happens, and I want you to do the same at home. So I'm going to stop this now, and we'll come back to you when we get to the next one.